Assalamualaikum and hello guys, my name is CHEN. I am here with my group members YIHAN and WANG to present what we find in the Coca-Cola's data. So the Coca-Cola is a multinational company that operates in more than 200 countries around the world. From the past 130 years, the company has provided the soft drink to the customer. Generally billions of the dollars in the revenue. So, however, since to the 2012, Coca-Cola's revenue has continued to decline. This decline stems from the manager's goals to restructure its bottling operations, which are the capital-intensive but generate low revenues. Many factors affect the company's revenue, include the price, the consumer purchasing power, the presence of the subs, consumers' taste and preference, the reputation, and others. The multiple regression model using the testing the importance of the global inflation rates, the consumer satisfaction index, and the number of employees shows that only the number of employees affects the company's revenue. The consumer satisfaction index and the global inflation rates do not affect the firm's revenue. It is that only the numbers of the employees affect the sales of Coca-Cola. There is no series correlations in the time series data, and there is no heterodicity in the residues. We collect 11 observations related to the Coca-Cola's revenue, employees, and consumer satisfaction index, and global inflation rate. The data collected relates to the period starting in the 2010 and ending in the 2020. So this study examined the relationship between the Coca-Cola's revenue, is the dependence variable, and global inflation rate, consumer satisfaction index, and numbers of employees. The study will use the multiple linear regression model as there are three independence variables. Since the Coca-Cola company is the global organization, it is assumed that determine the 5% signification levels of its sales.
Now let's see this slide. Our study examined the suitability of various variables on the revenues realized by Coca-Cola. Hypothesis testing will help us to determine whether these variables affect the company's sales or not. And there are three variables in this model, like the global inflation rate, consumer satisfaction index, and the number of employers. And we will use the F statistic here. Also, we will test the below hypothesis, like multiple line models, test the significance of the global inflation rate, the consumer satisfaction index, and the number of employers. We can see all here. Now let's see next slide. This table shows the raw data collected from the various data sources. Also about this table, we should pay attention about the revenues are given in billions and the employees are given in tens of thousands. Now let's see next slide. About this slide, we can see this diagram here. The results of this diagram shows, number one, we can see a positive linear relationship between the revenues and the number of the employers. It's very clear. And where the global inflation rate increase and the revenue will decrease, so there will be a negative linear relationship between these two. Also, there is a weak positive linear relationship between the revenues and the consumption index. We all can see here in the diagram. Now let's see next slide. About this slide, we can see in the line graphics, the Coca-Cola's revenue increased from the 2010 to 2012, but declined onwards. The inflation rate increased from 2010 to 2011, decreased from 2011 to 2050, and later increased until 2018, and then decreased in 2019 and 2020. The Consumer Satisfaction Index displays an element of the Signal-Lake pattern. Also, the number of the employers increased in 2010 and 2012, decreased until 2018, increased in 2019, but they also decreased in 2020. We can see all these changes in this diagram. Now let's see next slide. About this slide, we can see the value of F-statistic test, the significance of the multiple linear regression model. The model was not significant in predicting the Coca-Cola's revenues with a p-value of 0.0626, which is higher than the 0.05. It's very clear. The significance level was set to assess the appropriateness of the model for predicting the Coca-Cola sales. So the only relevant variable for the estimating the Coca-Cola's company revenue from the model is the number of the employees. It's the most important one. So for the revenue of the multiple linear regression model, show that the model has a R-squared of 0.6262, which implies that 62.62% of the sales were explained by the variation observed in the employees variable, as it was the only significant variable in this model, and the rest of 37.38% is explained by the other factors and not included in the model. The 62.62% indicates a moderate relationship between the independent and the dependent variables. This explains why the model has a p-value and which is very close to the 0.05. The level of significance set to the test the non-hypothesis. If the significant level is set at 10%, the model will be flooded because the p-value is less than 10%. We can see here. So the heteroscedastic results show an observed R-square value of the 0.2642 and the p-value of the 0.7376, which means that we failed to reject the non-hypothesis and concluded that there is no evidence of the heteroscedasticity was observed in the residual values.
The multiple linear regression model used to estimate Coca-Cola revenues did not meet the 0.05 significance level with the CPI, global inflation rate, and the number of employers. Only the number of employers was significant in estimating Coca-Cola's revenue, where the Consumer Satisfaction Index and global inflation rate were insignificant. Although the residual value derived from the model were not normally distributed, they did not exhibit several correlation or heteroscedasticity elements. So that's all for our presentation. Thank you for your listening.